At my engagement party, my fiancé's ex showed up uninvited. He proposed to me first with that same ring. Everyone gasped. I looked at my fiancé. He was pale. I took off the ring, handed it back, and said, "Keep it, and keep the debt that comes with it." The crystal champagne flute felt heavy in my hand, a physical anchor in a room that was rapidly losing its gravity, and I checked the time on my diamond-encrusted watch, $8, $14 p.m., noting that the catastrophe was arriving exactly 3 minutes ahead of schedule. We were at the Pierre Hotel, in the Grand Ballroom, a venue that cost $75,000 to rent for the evening, filled with 150 of our closest friends, business associates, and the social elite of Manhattan, who had come to celebrate the union of two power players, myself, the 32-year-old CEO of a boutique logistics firm, and Julian Thorne, the self-proclaimed venture capitalist, whose charm was as polished as the marble floors beneath our feet. Julian was standing on the raised dais, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, a gesture that 6 months ago I would have interpreted as affection, but now recognized as the tactile control of a handler managing an asset. He tapped his spoon against his glass, the sharp chime cutting through the murmur of conversation and the soft jazz quartet playing in the corner. "Friends, family," he began, his voice a rich, practiced baritone that had successfully seduced investors and women alike for a decade. "Thank you for being here tonight. When I met Elena 18 months ago, I knew my life was about to change. She is not just beautiful, she is brilliant. She is the anchor to my storm, the equity to my venture." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. I smiled, a tight, practiced expression that didn't reach my eyes, and touched the $4.5 carat solitaire diamond ring on my left hand, feeling the cold metal band against my skin. It was a stunning piece of jewelry, appraised at $48,000 or so Julian had told me when he slid it onto my finger 3 months ago during a sunset yacht cruise he claimed to have chartered, though I later learned he had merely bartered his presence at a networking event for the use of the boat. And so, Julian continued, raising his glass, to a future of shared success, shared dreams, and shared. He never finished the sentence. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a violence that silenced the jazz quartet instantly. A woman stood there, silhouetted by the light from the hallway. It was Vanessa, a woman Julian had described to me as his unstable, stalker ex-girlfriend who refused to move on. She didn't look unstable. She looked immaculate in a red dress that was clearly chosen to signify war, her hair pulled back in a severe, commanding bun. She walked down the center aisle, the sound of her heels striking the floor like hammer blows in the sudden silence. The crowd parted instinctively. Julian's hand on my back tightened, his fingers digging into my silk dress. "Security," he hissed under his breath, his smile frozen on his face. "Someone get security." But no one moved. The spectacle was too compelling. Vanessa stopped 10 feet from the dais. She looked at Julian, then at me, her expression one of pity mixed with steely resolve. "He proposed to me first," she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room, "with that same ring, 3 years ago. He told me I was his anchor, too, right before he drained my savings account to bridge a liquidity gap in his firm." The gasp from the audience was audible, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Julian's face went the color of ash. He laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound that fooled no one. "Vanessa, please, you're making a scene. You're unwell. We talked about this. Folks, I apologize. She's off her medication." He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, silent plea for me to play the role of the supportive partner, to dismiss the crazy woman, to save his image. I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not the man I had fallen in love with, but the spreadsheet of liabilities he actually was. I looked at Vanessa and nodded once, a gesture of solidarity that Julian missed entirely. Then I looked back at him. "She's not off her medication, Julian," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone he was still holding near us. "And she's right about the ring. I had it appraised yesterday by Mr. Sterling at the Diamond District. He recognized the serial number laser inscribed on the girdle. Use number $7,482 B dollar. It was sold to you 3 years ago, returned, then resold to you 4 months ago." I paused, letting the data sink in. "But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is the financing." I slid the ring off my finger. It felt heavy, burdened not by carats but by the lien attached to it. "You told me you bought this with the dividends from the TechCore exit, but there was no exit, was there? There is no TechCore. I pulled your credit report this morning, Julian. You financed this ring through a subprime predatory lender called Quick Cash Jewelers at an APR of $28.99%. You haven't made a single payment. The repo order was issued yesterday." I took his hand, the one that had been holding mine, and pressed the ring into his sweating palm. "Keep it, and keep the debt that comes with it, along with the $145,000 in credit card debt you tried to transfer to my name by forging my signature on the joint account application last Tuesday." The silence was total. Julian looked at the ring in his hand, then at the sea of faces, the investors, the colleagues, the socialites who were now looking at him with the clinical detachment of people witnessing a car crash. The narcissist archetype crumpled before my eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin a new web, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned to the crowd. "Please, enjoy the dinner. It's been paid for, by me, in full. Unlike anything Julian has ever never touched. I walked off the dais, past the stunned guests, past a smirking Vanessa, who whispered, "Good girl," as I passed, and out the double doors. I didn't look back. I walked straight to the valet stand, handed the attendant my ticket, and checked the time. $8, $22 p.m. The confrontation had taken exactly 8 minutes, but the preparation had taken 6 months of forensic dismantling of a life I thought was real. To understand how I ended up detonating my own engagement party, you have to understand the illusion of Julian Thorne. We met 18 months ago at a charity gala for ocean conservation. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, and ordered a martini with a specificity that suggested a man who knew exactly what he wanted. I was 31, successful, but fatigued by the relentless grind of running a logistics company. I was competent, wealthy, and entirely lonely. Julian was the white knight. He listened. He asked intelligent questions about supply chain management. He claimed to be a managing partner at Thorne Capital, a boutique firm specializing in green energy. He drove a $2023 Aston Martin. He lived in a penthouse in Tribeca. He was perfect, and that should have been the first red flag. In my line of work, if a deal looks perfect, it's because someone is hiding the variance report. But I was in love, or at least, I was in love with the way he made me feel. Protected, understood, and valued. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They were hairline fractures in the foundation. The first anomaly occurred 3 months into the relationship. We were at dinner at Le Bernardin. The bill came $840 for the tasting menu and wine. Julian reached for his wallet, smiling, and handed over his sleek black metal card. The waiter returned 3 minutes later, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir. The card was declined." Julian didn't flinch. He laughed, a smooth, unbothered sound. "Ah, the fraud algorithms. I just moved a large sum of capital to Singapore this morning for a deal. They probably froze it for security. Elena, darling, do you mind? I'll wire you the cash in the morning." I paid. It was $840. To me, it was a business expense. I didn't think twice. He didn't wire the cash the next morning. He forgot. And I, not wanting to be petty about money when he was supposedly moving millions to Singapore, didn't ask. This pattern repeated, always with a plausible high finance excuse. A frozen asset in Zurich, a banking holiday in Hong Kong, a system update at his brokerage. Meanwhile, he moved into my apartment temporarily while his penthouse was being renovated due to a water leak. He drove my car because his Aston Martin was in the shop for a custom exhaust fitting. I was acting as his line of credit, but I justified it as partnership. The turning point, the moment the context shifted to discovery, happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. Julian was in the shower. His phone, which he usually guarded with the paranoia of a spy, lit up on the bedside table. It wasn't a text from an investor. It was a notification from an app called Credit Karma. The preview read, "Asterisk alert, your score has dropped to 540. New collection agency added." Asterisk. I stared at the screen. $540. That wasn't the credit score of a venture capitalist moving millions to Singapore. That was the credit score of a financial corpse. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. I was a woman who managed fleets of trucks and negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts. I verified vendor insurance for a living, and I had never once verified the man sleeping in my bed. I unlocked his phone. He had used my birthday as his passcode, a detail I once thought was romantic and now realized was lazy manipulation, and opened his email. It was a graveyard of financial ruin. There were no emails from Singapore or Zurich. There were emails from Payday Advance, Last Chance Recovery, and a thread with a landlord in Queens threatening eviction for a studio apartment, not a Tribeca penthouse. The Thorne Capital domain name was registered to a GoDaddy account that cost $12 a year. I sat there, the phone burning my hand, listening to the water running in the shower. I had a choice. I could confront him right then. I could scream, throw him out, and cry. But the steely and determined part of my personality took over. Confrontation without leverage is just noise. I needed data. I needed a validator. I put the phone back exactly as I found it and went to the kitchen to make coffee. When Julian came out, wrapped in a towel, smiling that winning smile, I smiled back. "Good shower?" I asked. "Amazing," he said, kissing my forehead. "Ready to conquer the world." "Me too," I said. That morning, I didn't go to my office. I went to see Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was my oldest friend and a former forensic accountant for the FBI, who now ran a private investigation firm specializing in corporate fraud. She had 18 years of experience tracking money that didn't want to be found. I sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of files, and laid it out. "I need a full background check on Julian Thorne. Financials, criminal, civil, aliases, everything." Sarah looked at me, her expression softening. "The guy with the Aston Martin? It's a lease," I said, the realization hitting me in real time. "Or a rental. I don't know. Just find out." Sarah nodded. "Give me 24 hours. If he's a ghost, I'll find the sheet he's wearing." The next day, the report came back. It was 40 pages long. Julian Thorne wasn't his real name. He was born Julian Miller. He had legally changed his name 4 years ago after filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in Ohio. The Tribeca penthouse was an Airbnb he had rented for a month to hook me, paid for with a credit card that was later charged off. He had 3 civil judgments against him for unpaid debts, totaling totaling $85,000. And then there was the romance confidence section. Sarah had found 2 previous fiancés. One was in Chicago, suing him for $50,000. The other was Vanessa, here in New York. The note in the file said she had filed a police report for identity theft 2 years ago, claiming he had taken out loans in her name. The police report was closed for lack of evidence because they had been in a domestic partnership at the time. I sat in my office, reading the dossier. I felt sick, a physical nausea that roiled in my stomach. I had let this predator into my home, my life, and my bank accounts. Then I checked my own accounts. The joint account we had opened for household expenses 2 weeks ago, which I had funded with $25,000, was empty. Withdrawn in cash at a casino in Atlantic City over the weekend, he said he was at a board retreat. But it was worse. Sarah had flagged a pending application. He had applied for a $145,000 line of credit using my social security number and a forged signature. The application was pending approval. If it went through, I would be on the hook for his lifestyle. I called Sarah. "Stop the application," I ordered. "Flag it as fraud." "Done," Sarah said. "Elena, you need to get him out. Tonight. Change the locks. Get a restraining order." "No," I said, watching the rain hit the window of my office. "If I kick him out now, he disappears. He ghosts me. And I'm left cleaning up the mess, wondering if he has copies of my keys or my files. And he'll just do this to someone else. I need to nail him. I need to expose him so thoroughly that he can never run this con in this city again." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "He wants to get married," I said. "He's been pushing for a date. He wants to lock down the asset. I'm going to give him what he wants. I'm going to throw the biggest engagement party New York has ever seen. And I'm going to invite everyone, including his victims." The planning of the party was a macabre dance. I played the role of the blushing bride to be perfectly. I let him pick the venue, the Pierre, naturally, the most expensive option. I let him invite his investors, who I later learned were actually other con artists or people he was actively grooming. I insisted we pay the deposit. I told him, "Julian, darling, why don't you put the deposit on your card? You need the points for our honeymoon." He panicked, claiming his card was still having limit issues. I graciously offered to pay, keeping the receipt as evidence of his insolvency. I contacted Vanessa. It was a difficult call. She was defensive at first, assuming I was calling to gloat. When I told her I knew about the ring and the identity theft, she wept. "He destroyed me," she whispered. "He made me feel like I was crazy." "You're not crazy," I told her. "And on December $12, you're going to get your vindication. I need you to come to the party. I need you to interrupt the speech." She agreed without hesitation. The week before the party, the final piece of the trap fell into place. Julian came home beaming, holding a velvet box. "I upgraded the setting," he lied. "I wanted it to be perfect for the party." He handed me the ring. I put it on, smiling. The next day, I took it to Mr. Sterling in the Diamond District. He ran the serial number. "This is a financed piece," he told me, looking at his screen. "High-risk lender, Quick Cash Jewelers in Queens. There's a lien on it. And, miss, it's listed as in default, repossession ordered." Julian hadn't upgraded the setting. He had pawned it and gotten it back, or reshuffled the debt. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I was Peter. Which brings us back to the moment I walked out of the Pierre Hotel, the cool night air hitting my face. I stood on the sidewalk, my $4,000 dress rustling in the wind. The doorman looked at me. "Taxi, Miss Vance?" "No," I said, pulling out my phone. "I have a ride." A black SUV pulled up. It wasn't a limo. It was Sarah, my validator. She rolled down the window. "Did he cry?" she asked. "He crumbled," I said, getting into the car. "Did you get the recording?" Sarah pointed to the dashboard. "Every word." The microphone on the podium was fed directly to my recorder. "We have his admission of the debt, his panic, and the witnesses confirming he tried to pass off a lien-encumbered asset as a gift. It's enough for the fraud investigation." "Where to?" Sarah asked as we pulled into traffic. "My apartment," I said. "I have a locksmith meeting us there in 20 minutes. And then, we have to file the police report." The party was over. The hook had been set. The context was established. Now, we were entering the discovery-build phase of the legal war. Julian Thorne thought the worst thing that happened to him tonight was being embarrassed in front of his friends. He had no idea that while he was stuttering on stage, I had already initiated a forensic audit of every transaction he had made in the last 18 months. I wasn't just breaking up with him, I was repossessing his life. The ride from the Pierre Hotel to my apartment in Tribeca took exactly 22 minutes, a window of time in which my phone vibrated 47 times with calls from Julian and received 12 increasingly erratic text messages ranging from "You're hysterical" to "We need to talk about the investors" to "I love you. Please don't do this." I didn't answer a single one. I sat in the back of Sarah's SUV, watching the city blur by, feeling the adrenaline of the confrontation settle into a cold, hard knot of procedural determination. When we arrived at my building at $8:50 p.m., the locksmith I had booked 3 days in advance, a man named Mr. Henderson who charged a premium $450 emergency fee, was already waiting in the lobby. We went up to the penthouse. It took him 12 minutes to drill out the core of the high-security lock and replace it with a Medico M 4-cylinder, a commercial-grade system that I knew Julian couldn't pick or bypass. As Mr. Henderson handed me the new keys, heavy and jagged in my palm, I heard the elevator ding down the hall. Julian stormed out, his tuxedo disheveled, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and the gin he had likely downed before chasing after me. He stopped when he saw Sarah standing guard by the door, her arms crossed, her badge clearly visible on her belt. "Elena," he shouted, ignoring the locksmith. "You locked me out. My things are in there. You can't just evict me. I have rights. I established residency." I turned to face him, my hand resting on the doorframe of the apartment I had bought with my own money 3 years before I ever met him. "You established residency based on fraud, Julian," I said, my voice flat and projected just enough to be heard over the hallway ventilation. "And according to the New York Penal Law, Article 155 obtainment of property or services by fraudulent pretense negates the tenancy agreement. Also, Sarah here has just served you well. She's about to." Sarah stepped forward and slapped a manila envelope onto his chest. "Restraining order," she said cheerfully. "Issued by Judge Davies at $4:00 p.m. today, based on the sworn affidavit of financial identity theft and menacing behavior. You are to stay 500 feet away from Miss Vance, her home, and her place of business. If you step 1 foot closer to this door, I arrest you right now." Julian looked at the paper, then at the new lock, then at me. The realization that he wasn't dealing with a heartbroken girlfriend, but a mobilized legal adversary finally hit him. He sneered, a look of pure, unmasked malice. "You think you're smart, Elena? You think you can destroy me? I have investors. I have capital. I'll ruin your little logistics company. I know your clients." "You don't know my clients," I corrected him. "You know the names I left on the dummy spreadsheets on the kitchen counter last week? The ones you tried to call to pitch your bridge loan scheme to? Yeah, those numbers go to a voicemail box monitored by the FBI's fraud division. Detective Miller sends his regards." Julian went white. He turned and ran for the stairwell, abandoning the elevator, fleeing the building like the rat he was. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in forensic dismantling. I didn't sleep. I took the next day off work, designating it as a crisis management day. Sarah and I turned my dining room table into a war room. We had the recording from the party. We had the credit report. We had the forged loan application for $145,000 that I had intercepted. But I needed more. I needed to ensure that this wasn't just a he said, she said civil dispute. I needed it to be a federal case. I started contacting the investors who had been at the party. These were the people Julian had introduced me to, the ones he claimed were backing Thorn Capital. I called the first name on the list, a Mr. Arthur Sterling, no relation to the jeweler, an elderly gentleman who had looked confused during my speech. "Mr. Sterling," I said when he answered, "this is Elena Vance. We met last night. I am conducting an audit of Julian Thorn's accounts. Did you give him money?" There was a long silence on the line. "I gave him $250,000. Mr. Sterling whispered, his voice trembling. "He told me it was a secured note for a solar farm in Arizona. He said you were the guarantor. He showed me your signature." My blood ran cold. He hadn't just used my credit. He had used my reputation as collateral for a Ponzi scheme. "I never signed anything, Mr. Sterling," I said gently, "but I need you to send me the documents he gave you. Right now, we are building a case to get your money back." Over the next 6 hours, I spoke to 12 people. The story was always the same. Julian had charmed them, name-dropped me and my company, showed them forged documents claiming I was a partner or guarantor, and taken their money amounts ranging from $50,000 to $500,000. The total sum of the theft was $3.2 million. He wasn't just a grifter. He was running a full-blown securities fraud operation using my identity as the bait. I organized the evidence into a 3-ring binder, labeled the Thorn File. Section 1, Identity Theft, the loan application, the credit cards. Section 2, Wire Fraud, the transfers from investors to his personal accounts, which Sarah had traced using her forensic tools. Section 3, Securities Fraud, the fake promissory notes. On Thursday morning, exactly 36 hours after the party, I walked into the Manhattan District Attorney's office. I didn't go to the front desk. I had an appointment with Assistant District Attorney Reynolds, a contact Sarah had leveraged from her FBI days. I placed the binder on his desk. "I'm not here to file a complaint," I said. "I'm here to hand you a conviction. The work is done. The chain of custody is intact. The witnesses are ready to testify. All you have to do is sign the arrest warrant." Reynolds flipped through the binder, his eyebrows rising with every page. When he got to the section detailing the quick cash jeweler's lien on the engagement ring and the subsequent investor fraud tied to it, he looked up. "He used the ring as collateral for the loans? He showed the ring to investors as proof of his liquidity," I explained. "He told them it was a paid-off asset worth $100,000. It was a prop in his con. And, technically, since the ring is subject to a repo order, that's another count of fraud." Reynolds closed the binder. "Where is he now?" "He's at the W Hotel in Times Square," I said. "Room $1,402. He checked in yesterday using a credit card in the name of Jonathan Hart, another alias." Sarah tracked the transaction. Reynolds picked up his phone. "I'll get the warrant. The arrest happened at $2:00 p.m. that afternoon. I wasn't there, but the witnesses, the internet commenters, and news outlets captured it perfectly. Julian was walking out of the W Hotel, wearing a new suit he had likely just charged to the stolen card, looking every bit the confident businessman. He was approached by 2 plainclothes detectives. "You could see the moment the reality set in on the TMZ footage that surfaced later. He tried to run, a pathetic, stumbling dash toward a waiting taxi, but he was tackled on the sidewalk in front of 1,000 tourists. The headline on the Times New York Post Times the next morning was brutal and perfect. Thorn in his side. Fake VC arrested in Times Square after fiancé drops dime. They used the photo of me walking away from him at the party, juxtaposed with his mugshot, where his perfectly coiffed hair was messy and his eyes were dead. The viral storytelling aspect of the plan had worked. I wasn't the victim, I was the hero of the narrative. My company's website traffic spiked $400% in 24 hours. Clients called not to cancel, but to congratulate me on my due diligence. I had turned a personal humiliation into a professional case study in risk management. But the legal process is a slow grind, and the aftermath phase required endurance. Julian was denied bail due to the flight risk and the multiple aliases. He sat in Rikers Island for 9 months, while his lawyer, a court-appointed defender named Mr. Sillen, tried to cut a deal. Julian sent me letters from prison. They were masterpieces of manipulation. Asterisk Elena, I did it for us. Asterisk, he wrote in one. Asterisk, I wanted to give you the life you deserved. The $3.2 million was an investment. It would have paid off. Don't let them put me away. If you drop the charges, I can pay everyone back. Asterisk, I handed the letters directly to ADA Reynolds. Add these to the file, I said. Witness tampering and admission of guilt. I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. I thought about Vanessa, who was finally getting her life back together now that the police report was reopened. I thought of Mr. Sterling, who had lost his retirement savings. Julian wasn't a tragic figure. He was a pathogen, and I was the antibiotic. The discovery phase deepened as the forensic accountants dug into the shell companies Julian had set up. We found that the money wasn't just invested in bad deals. It was spent lavishly. $200,000 on private jet charters, $50,000 on watches, $15,000 on a membership to a club he never visited. It was pure, unadulterated narcissism, funded by the ruin of others. The final tally of the fraud was $4.8 million, spanning 5 years and 3 states. The engagement party had been the tipping point that collapsed a house of cards he had been building since he was 22. The trial began 14 months after the party. It was the climax of the procedural justice arc. The courtroom was packed. The witnesses were there, the investors, Vanessa, and even the owner of the Quick Cash Jewelers. I took the stand on the 3rd day. Julian refused to look at me. He stared at the table, scribbling on a notepad. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a scorned woman, a vindictive ex who was exaggerating a business failure. Miss Vance, Mr. Sillen asked, pacing in front of the jury box. Isn't it true that you enjoyed the lifestyle Mr. Thorne provided? The dinners? The car? You didn't complain when he was spending money on you. I leaned into the microphone, my voice calm, the voice of a CEO addressing a shareholder meeting. Mr. Sillen, the lifestyle you referred to was paid for with stolen money, including $25,000 stolen directly from my own bank account, and the car was a lease in his alias's name that was 3 months behind on payments. I didn't complain because I was being defrauded. The moment I discovered the fraud, I didn't enjoy it. I ended it, and I brought the receipts. I held up the binder Times, the Thorne File Times, which was now Exhibit A. This is the forensic accounting of every dollar he spent. He spent $42,000 on dinners. He invested $0 in any actual business. That is not a business failure. That is theft. The jury nodded. They understood the math. The math was the ultimate truth. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. $12 counts of wire fraud, $4 counts of aggravated identity theft, $1 count of securities fraud. As the foreman read the verdict, Julian finally looked at me. His eyes were wet, but it wasn't sadness. It was rage. He mouthed something that looked like, "You witch." I simply adjusted my glasses and looked through him, focusing on the seal of the state of New York on the wall behind the judge. He was no longer a person to me. He was a closed case file, a liability written off the books. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 months later. I prepared a victim impact statement, but I didn't write about heartbreak. I wrote about the breach of trust, the systemic manipulation, and the financial violence he had inflicted. I stood before Judge Davies, the same judge who had signed the restraining order, and read it. Julian Thorne viewed human beings as assets to be liquidated, I said. He didn't break hearts, he broke futures. He stole Mr. Sterling's retirement. He stole Vanessa's credit history. He tried to steal my reputation. A predator like this does not rehabilitate. He simply finds new prey. I asked the court for the maximum sentence to ensure the safety of the public. Judge Davies listened intently. When it was his turn to speak, he looked at Julian with utter disdain. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated abuse of intimacy. You utilize the guise of romance to commit grand larceny. You are a danger to society. The sentence was delivered. $180 months in federal prison, 15 years. Restitution of $4.8 million. Mandatory financial monitoring for life upon release, 15 years. He would be in his late 40s when he got out. The aftermath was over. The resolution could finally begin. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright spring sunlight. Sarah was waiting for me. It's done, I I said. He's gone. How do you feel? She asked. I checked my watch. It was $11, $14 a.m. I had a meeting with a new client at noon. I feel efficient, I said. I feel like the variance has been corrected. We got into the car and drove away, leaving Julian Thorne to rot in the cell he had built for himself. 5 years later, I was 37. My company, Vance Logistics, had expanded. I had opened a new division dedicated to supply chain security and fraud prevention. I was dating again, a kind architect named David, who had a verifiable credit score of $800 and who insisted on splitting the bill on our first date. I didn't check his phone. I didn't need to. I had learned to trust my intuition, but I had also learned to verify. The trauma of the Julian event had faded into a scar tougher skin, but not an open wound. I was happy. I was safe. Then, the echo arrived. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a notification from the Federal Bureau of Prisons Victim Notification System. Asterisk, inmate Julian Miller, formerly Thorne, has petitioned for a compassionate transfer to a medical facility due to a chronic condition. Asterisk. I read the email while sitting in my office, overlooking the Hudson River. A medical condition. I remembered the water leak in his penthouse. I remembered the frozen assets in Singapore. I remembered the upgraded setting on the ring. It was undoubtedly another con, another angle he was working to get a softer mattress or better food. I logged into the portal. There was a section for victim comments. I typed a single sentence. Asterisk. The inmate has a documented history of fabricating crises to manipulate systems. I recommend independent medical verification by a bureau-approved physician. Asterisk. I hit send. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt like a responsible citizen reporting a hazard. I closed the laptop and looked at the ring on my right hand, a simple gold band I had bought for myself to celebrate hitting $10 million in revenue. It was real gold, paid for in cash. No liens, no debt, no lies. I picked up my phone and called Vanessa. We met for coffee once a month now. She was married with a baby on the way, glowing and recovered. Did you get the notification? She asked when I answered. I did, I said. Did you comment? I did, she laughed. I told them to check his pulse because he hasn't had a heart in years. We laughed together, a sound that was light and free. The engagement party seemed like a lifetime ago, a scene from a movie I had watched once and didn't need to see again. I hung up the phone, grabbed my bag, and walked out of my office. The elevator arrived instantly. I stepped in, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the doors close on the past. The ledger was balanced, the audit was complete, and the future was entirely, beautifully mine. The years following the sentencing were not a fade to black, but rather a complex, high-definition reconstruction of a life that had been structurally compromised. While the courtroom victory provided the legal severance, the resolution phase required a different kind of architectural engineering. It began with the realization that silence was no longer an option. The viral storytelling component of my profile, which had started with that time's New York Post-Times headline, metastasized into something I hadn't anticipated. I became an unwilling avatar for financial vigilance. 3 months after Julian was transferred to the Federal Correctional Facility in Fort Dix, I was approached by a literary agent named Marcus Thorne, no relation, a grim irony we both acknowledged in our first meeting. He wanted me to write a book, not a tell-all about a bad romance, but a procedural handbook on financial intimacy and fraud detection for women in power. I hesitated. The somber and reflective part of me wanted to bury the trauma in the archives of my company's server, but the steely and determined part, the part that had stood on the dais at the Pierre Hotel, knew that leaving the narrative void would only allow Julian, or men like him, to fill it with their own distorted versions of the truth. I signed the contract. The advance was $250,000. I donated every cent of it to the Vanessa Fund, a nonprofit I established to help victims of identity theft recover their credit scores. Writing the book, titled Times, the Variance Report, forced me to reopen the Julian file and examine the granular details I had glossed over during the adrenaline of the trial. This process triggered a secondary discovery phase, one that was less about criminal evidence and more about psychological excavation. I spent nights in my study with Sarah, my validator, going through the thousands of emails Julian had sent during our relationship. We weren't looking for fraud anymore. We were looking for the pattern, the algorithm of the narcissist, to decode it for my readers. It was during this deep dive, late one Tuesday in November, exactly 2 years after the engagement party, that we found the anomaly. It was a single, archived email thread from Julian to a generic Gmail address, projectalpha88@gmail.com. The subject line was, the insurance policy. The content was a string of alphanumeric code. Sarah, whose FBI training made her suspicious of anything that looked like a cipher, spent 3 days brute forcing it. It's not a code, Elena, she told me over takeout Thai food in my office. It's a wallet address, cryptocurrency, cold storage. My stomach tightened. The forensic accountants had stripped Julian of his cash, his cars, and his watches. But crypto? That was the dark matter of the financial universe. We traced the wallet on the blockchain. It held $1.2 million in Tether, transferred in small, jagged amounts over the 3 years he had been defrauding investors. It was his nest egg, his get-out-of-jail fund waiting for him upon release. He hadn't spent it all. He had hidden the principal. The procedural justice instinct kicked in instantly. I could have let it go. He was in prison for 15 years. By the time he got out, $1.2 million wouldn't buy him the life he wanted. But the principal of the total audit demanded zero variance. I contacted ADA Reynolds. We set up a meeting with the federal asset forfeiture team. The legal hurdle was significant. We had to prove the wallet belonged to Julian. The email thread was circumstantial. We needed the private key, or a confession. Reynolds looked at me across his cluttered desk. He's never going to give it up, Elena. It's his only hope, unless we offer him something. We offer him nothing, I said, my voice cold. We offer him the one thing a narcissist can't resist: attention. I requested a visitation. It was the first time I had seen Julian since the sentencing. The prison visiting room was a study in sensory deprivation. Gray walls, bolted down steel tables, the smell of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. When they brought him out, the change was startling. The polished venture capitalist was gone. In his place was a man who looked thinner, harder, his edges sharpened by the brutal hierarchy of incarceration. He sat down, looking at me with a mixture of hunger and suspicion. Elena, he said, his voice raspy. I knew you'd come. You missed the excitement. I don't miss anything, Julian, I said, placing a single sheet of paper on the table between us. It was a printout of the blockchain ledger showing the wallet balance. I'm here because you forgot to close your tabs. Julian looked at the paper. His eyes flickered, a momentary breach in his mask. Then he leaned back, crossing his arms. I don't know what that is. Numbers on a page. It's $1.2 million in stolen investor funds, I said calmly. And here is the deal. I have the wallet address. The FBI Cyber Division is currently running a dictionary attack on your email passcodes to find the key. They will find it. It might take 6 months. It might take a year. But when they do, they will add another count of money laundering to your sentence. That's another 5 years, Julian. Consecutive. I leaned forward. Or, you give me the key right now. The money goes to the restitution fund. You get 0 time added. And I will include a chapter in my book about how you finally, at the bitter end, did the right thing. You get to be a footnote of redemption instead of a masterclass in stupidity. He stared at me for a long time. The calculation was visible in his eyes. He didn't care about the restitution. He didn't care about the victims. He cared about the narrative. He wanted to be the smart guy who negotiated a deal, not the idiot who got caught hiding loot. And he was terrified of the extra 5 years. You'll write it? He asked. That I volunteered the funds? I'll write that you cooperated, I said. That's as much spin as I'm willing to sell. He asked for a pen. He wrote a string of 12 words on the back of the paper, the seed phrase. I took the paper. I stood up. Goodbye, Julian. Wait, he said, a flash of the old desperation surfacing. Doesn't this count for something? Between us, I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just the indifference one feels toward a resolved error in a spreadsheet. It counts for the ledger, I said, and the ledger is the only thing that binds us. I walked out of the prison and handed the paper to the waiting federal agents. The funds were seized within the hour. The $1.2 million was distributed among the victims who had received only pennies on the dollar from the initial seizure. Mr. Sterling got back another $150,000. Vanessa received enough to pay off the last of the loans he had taken in her name. The Julian Thorne insolvency was finally mathematically closed. The publication of Times, the variance report times 6 months later, was the catalyst for the final phase of my life's restructuring. The book debuted at number 2 on the bestseller list. It struck a nerve. I received thousands of letters from women and men who had been charmed, defrauded, and discarded by their own Julians. They weren't just stories of financial loss, they were stories of identity erosion. I realized that my resolution couldn't just be personal, it had to be structural. I expanded Vance Logistics, creating a subsidiary called Vance Verification. We offered forensic background checks for high net worth individuals entering partnerships, romantic or business. It was unromantic, cynical, and wildly successful. We became the gold standard for trust but verify. 5 years post-sentencing, I was 40. The healed life, the profile demanded, had manifested in ways I hadn't expected. I was standing in the wings of a TED conference stage in Vancouver. The headset microphone was taped to my cheek. My hands, which used to shake before board meetings, were steady. David, my architect partner, was in the front row. We had been together for 3 years. We weren't married. We didn't share bank accounts. We had a cohabitation agreement that ran 40 pages, drafted by Sarah and vetted by his lawyer. It was the most romantic document I had ever signed because it was built on absolute, transparent reality. There were no hidden variances. The announcer introduced me. Please welcome the CEO of Vance Verification and the author of Times The Variance Report, Elena Vance. I walked onto the stage into the bright, hot spotlight. I looked out at the audience, a sea of faces looking for answers. I didn't start with a joke. I didn't start with a platitude. I started with the truth. 7 years ago, I began, my voice echoing in the auditorium. I stood in a ballroom in New York City and realized that the man holding my hand was a fabrication. I lost a fiancé that night, but I gained a superpower, the ability to distinguish between the story we want to believe and the data that actually exists. I clicked the clicker and a slide appeared behind me. It wasn't a graph of revenue. It was a picture of the engagement ring, the one with the lien on it. This object, I continued, was supposed to be a symbol of love. In reality, it was a symbol of unmanaged risk. In business, we have audits, we have compliance officers, we have checks and balances. In our personal lives, we are taught that love means suspending those checks. I am here to tell you that true intimacy is not a suspension of the truth. It is the total voluntary disclosure of it. The talk went viral, millions of views. The viral storytelling arc completed its loop. I wasn't the jilted bride anymore. I was the architect of truth. The shame that Julian had tried to inflict on me, the shame of being fooled, had been transmuted into a shield for others. The final echo of the past didn't come from Julian. It came from myself. One rainy Tuesday, I was cleaning out my old office files, preparing to move the headquarters to a larger building. I found the binder times, the Thorn file asterisk. It was dusty, the edges battered. I opened it. I looked at the mugshot, the credit reports, the emails. I remembered the woman who had compiled it, terrified, angry, desperate to prove she wasn't crazy. I ran my hand over the pages. I realized I didn't need to keep it anymore. The evidence had served its purpose. The conviction was secured. The lessons were codified in my book and my business. Keeping the physical artifact was just hoarding a ghost. I took the binder to the industrial shredder in the mailroom. I fed it in, one section at a time. The identity theft section, the wire fraud section, the securities fraud section. The machine roared, chewing the past into confetti. When the last page disappeared, I waited for the machine to stop. Silence returned to the room. I felt a lightness in my chest, a physical unburdening. I walked out of the building and into the rain. David was waiting for me in his car, a Volvo, safe, reliable, fully paid for. He saw me coming and leaned over to open the door. Ready to go? He asked. Ready, I said. Where are we going? Home, he said. And then maybe we can go over the blueprints for the renovation. I think we need to adjust the budget for the kitchen. I smiled. I'd love to see the budget. I said, let's audit it together. We drove off into the gray, wet city, leaving the ghost of Julian Thorn behind in the shredder, dissolved into a million pieces of unrecognizable paper. The variance was zero. The books were closed. The story was over.